Welcome to Retro Rides Rendezvous. Today we embark upon another expedition, the quest for the Crimson Lens. Our objective is to reproduce a taillight lens from a 1934 through 1936 Cadillac. If fortune favors the expedition, another small piece of automotive history shall continue its journey for generations yet to come. Having received reports of a remarkably well-preserved crimson lens residing safely within the local area, I resolved that an expedition should commence without delay. Our specimen was fashioned nearly 90 years ago. Unlike many of its descendants, it is made of glass, a material possessing both remarkable beauty and an unfortunate dislike of concrete floors. If we succeed in preserving every contour and every optical detail, this original lens need never again shoulder the burden of daily service. Instead, it shall become the master from which many future lenses are born. Every worthwhile expedition begins with preparation. Before we ask the mold to remember this artifact, we must first remove nearly a century of accumulated history. Dust, road grime, old adhesive, each has settled upon the glass with the determination of barnacles upon the hull of an old sailing ship. Today's scientific apparatus consists of complimentary hotel toothpaste and the toothbrush that accompanied it. Neither appears particularly impressive, but both have exceeded expectations. One should never underestimate equipment obtained free of charge. The purpose of this exercise extends beyond simple cleanliness. Every particle left upon the lens today will faithfully reproduce itself in every mold tomorrow. Dirt, I have observed, possesses an extraordinary instinct for self-preservation. As the glass gradually reveals itself, a particularly clever feature comes into view. The reverse side contains a Fresnel lens. Its delicate concentric rings resemble the ripples left behind after a stone disturbs a quiet pond. These ridges gather the modest light of an ordinary bulb and persuade it to perform well beyond its natural abilities. Cadillac's engineers understood optics remarkably well. Naturally, our mold must understand them equally well. Every ridge matters. Every curve matters. Nothing shall be overlooked. With the cleaning complete, another obstacle presents itself. Time has claimed unhoused portions of both mounting ears. The damage is unfortunate, though hardly surprising. Time has never shown much sympathy toward glass. Fortunately, our expedition anticipated such difficulties. The missing sections will be reconstructed using a modern compound known as J.B. Weld. Though unavailable to 19th century explorers, I suspect many would gladly have traded a week's provisions for a single tube. The compound is carefully worked into the damaged areas, restoring not only the missing edges, but also the mounting hole and supporting lip exactly as they once appeared. The accuracy of every future casting depends entirely upon the quality of the master before us. The mold cannot improve upon the original. It can only remember it. Once the repair has fully cured, shaping begins. A razor blade removes the larger imperfections. Sandpaper follows, patiently, methodically, like a river wearing its way through stone. Progress is slow. Fortunately, history has never rewarded haste. As a final refinement, a light coat of lacquer is applied across the repaired surface. The lacquer settles into the smallest imperfections, much as morning mist settles quietly across an open valley. When it dries, the repair becomes smoother, and the mold will have less to remember. Our preparations are now complete. The artifact is ready. The true expedition may finally begin. With the artifact now suitably prepared, our attention turns toward constructing the apparatus by which its every feature shall be remembered. For this undertaking, I have fashioned a curious partition from PETG, using the workshop's mechanical printing contrivance. a Bamboo Labs X1C3D printer, if one insists upon the manufacturer's designation, though its method of operation would undoubtedly bewilder the finest engineers of Her Majesty's Empire. Its results have thus far proven entirely satisfactory. Notice the raised formations upon its surface. These shall serve as registration keys, ensuring that when the two halves of the mold are eventually reunited, each shall return to precisely the position from which it came. Even the finest maps are of little use if one cannot align them. Before proceeding further, the surface is covered with ordinary packing tape. Its purpose is neither glamorous nor especially heroic. Rather, it provides a smooth barrier, allowing the partition to separate cleanly from the cured silicone once this stage of the expedition has concluded. I have found that many difficult problems may be prevented with nothing more sophisticated than proper preparation. The artifact is now secured to the partition using a modest quantity of carpenter's glue. The glue serves two purposes. The first is obvious. It prevents the lens from wandering off in the middle of the expedition, an outcome I should regard rather unfavorably. The second is considerably more important. It forms a small dam around the base of the lens, preventing liquid silicone from creeping beneath the artifact and finding its way into places where it has absolutely no business being. Silicone, much like water upon a mountainside, possesses an extraordinary talent for discovering the smallest available path. I have learned that one ignores this characteristic at one's peril. With the lens secured, attention turns toward the construction of the mold box itself. These walls were likewise produced upon the almost magical mechanical printer. I shall confess, however, that while this arrangement ultimately proved successful, I remain unconvinced that it represents the finest solution. An explorer should always be willing to admit when a better route likely exists. Future expeditions shall almost certainly employ a box assembled with screws, rather than persuasion and hot glue. Even so, these walls are lined with packing tape to discourage the silicone from establishing a permanent residence. A light application of mold release follows shortly thereafter. Experience has taught me that encouraging two materials to separate peacefully is considerably easier than forcing them to do so after the fact. Construction of the enclosure may now commence. Each wall is secured with hot glue until the entire assembly stands as a single structure. Additional reinforcement is then provided with a generous wrapping of duct tape. One quickly discovers that liquid silicone has an unsettling lack of respect for optimism. If it suspects even the smallest weakness in one's defenses, it will almost certainly investigate. One final matter required attention before our preparations could be considered complete. A small passage was drilled through the partition beneath the lens. At first glance, it may appear rather unnecessary. However, this mold shall eventually endure curing beneath considerable pressure. Without this small vent, air trapped beneath the artifact might create a pressure difference capable of disturbing our carefully prepared master. A simple hole often prevents surprisingly complicated problems. With that precaution complete, the lower half of our mold box now stands ready. The camp has been established. The defenses appear secure. It is finally time to introduce the material upon which the success of this entire expedition shall depend, the silicone. For today's undertaking, I have selected a rather modest variety, acquired from the vast commercial marketplace, known simply as Amazon. It was not especially expensive. Whether thrift proves to be wisdom or merely optimism remains to be seen. The manufacturer specifies equal proportions of each component, measured either by weight or by volume. On this occasion, I have elected to measure by volume. Chemistry, I have learned, is generally unconcerned with one's preferred method, provided one follows the instructions. The two components are brought together and mixed thoroughly, not hurriedly, not carelessly. A full 2 minutes of deliberate stirring persuades each half that it no longer exists independently. Only then may they begin the remarkable transformation into silicone. The mixture is prepared within a rather broad vessel. Some might question the choice. Experience, however, has taught me that a shallow pool surrenders its imprisoned air considerably more readily than a deep one. The bubbles, it would seem, are every bit as eager to escape as the rest of us. Now comes one of the expedition's more fascinating observations. The fresh silicone is placed within the vacuum chamber. Our objective is simple: remove the air. Before it has an opportunity to immortalize itself inside the mold, the chamber is sealed, the vacuum pump awakened. Presently, the pressure begins to fall. I draw the vacuum to nearly 28 inches of mercury, requiring both a properly sealed chamber and a vacuum pump capable of respectable persuasion. Then, the spectacle begins. At first, the silicone rises dramatically, swelling upward with an enthusiasm that suggests it fully intends to escape the container altogether. One unfamiliar with the process might regard this as cause for alarm. It is not. The bubbles are merely making their final attempt at freedom. Within moments, the great frothing mass quietly collapses back upon itself, carrying with it the vast majority of the trapped air. It is a most satisfying sight. One cannot help but feel that the silicone has just exhaled. The machinery responsible for this curious phenomenon deserves a brief introduction. The vacuum chamber itself is of modern manufacture. The pump, however, is considerably older. Constructed sometime during the 1920s, it has already enjoyed a life longer than many of the automobiles I restore. Though separated by nearly a century, the old pump and the modern chamber perform their duties together with admirable cooperation. There is, I suspect, a lesson in that. With the silicone now properly degassed, the time has come to commit it to the mold. Before the main pour begins, I first brush a thin layer directly upon the surface of the artifact. Some may argue this step is unnecessary. They may even be correct. Even so, I have found that a little extra caution at the beginning of an expedition often prevents a great deal of disappointment near its conclusion. The brush encourages the silicone into every crook, every ridge, and every delicate contour. Should even a single bubble attempt to conceal itself against the master, it shall find itself thoroughly outnumbered. The first preparations now complete, there remains but one task before this half of the expedition may be considered concluded. The silicone must be committed to the mold. Rather than pouring directly upon the artifact, I introduce the silicone into a single corner of the enclosure and allow it to advance of its own accord. Like a slow and patient tide, creeping across a quiet shoreline, it gradually surrounds the lens, filling every recess and every delicate contour without trapping unnecessary air. Nature, I have often observed, is remarkably capable when one simply refrains from interfering. The silicone continues to rise until the artifact rests beneath approximately 1 inch of material. This additional thickness serves an important purpose. A mold too thin possesses all the structural confidence of a wet biscuit. One of suitable thickness, however, shall faithfully support the lens through many future castings. With the pour complete, the entire assembly is transferred to the pressure vessel. The heavy lid is secured. Compressed air is introduced until the chamber reaches approximately 50 pounds per square inch. There, the mold shall remain undisturbed throughout the night. Some portions of an expedition demand effort, others demand patience. This is decidedly one of the latter. Morning arrives. The pressure is released, and our attention turns to the moment every explorer anticipates with equal measures of optimism and apprehension. The splitter board, having faithfully served its purpose, is carefully removed from the mold. Its departure reveals the first half of our work. Not every detail is immediately ready for inspection, as the artifact remains in place. A small amount of excess silicone must be trimmed away. The carpenter's glue, whose services are no longer required, is likewise removed. Fortunately, it departs with considerably less resistance than it first arrived. Before the second half of the mold may be poured, one final precaution remains. A careful application of mold release is spread across both the cured silicone and the master itself. The release agent is then gently polished from the surface of the lens until only the thinnest possible film remains. This future lens must possess the clarity of polished glass. Excess mold release has little interest in assisting that objective. Attention now turns toward the channels through which our future lens shall be born, the sprue through which the crimson lens shall be poured, and the vents through which the last stubborn pockets of air shall make their escape. Each is carefully secured to the master using cyanoacrylate adhesive, assisted by an accelerator that persuades the glue to abandon all hesitation. Their positions may appear unremarkable. They are anything but. The success of every casting yet to come depends greatly upon where these small passages begin and where they ultimately lead. With the sprue and vents established, the mold box is assembled once again. I shall readily admit that this method, employing hot glue and a generous quantity of duct tape, would likely receive little praise in the grand engineering societies of Europe. Even so, it performs its duties adequately. Explorers have long understood that the finest solution and the available solution are not always the same thing. The second batch of silicone is prepared in precisely the same manner as before. It is mixed thoroughly, carefully degassed beneath vacuum, and introduced into the mold exactly as its predecessor was. The only notable difference is its color, the result of obtaining this particular batch from an entirely different supplier. Once again, the silicone is poured slowly into a single location and permitted to find its own course around the master. It is covered by approximately 1 additional inch of material, ensuring the completed mold shall possess the strength required for many expeditions yet to come. The assembly returns to the pressure vessel, where it shall spend another quiet evening beneath 50 pounds of pressure. With another night's patience behind us, the time has finally arrived. The completed mold is carefully opened. The two halves separate cleanly. The artifact, having surrendered every contour and every optical detail entrusted to its care, is at last released. Our newly completed mold appears most encouraging. Its surfaces are smooth, its finish remarkably glossy. Every indication suggests that it shall prove an excellent instrument for producing transparent lenses. Appearances, however, have been known to deceive even experienced explorers. There remains but one true test. Can this mold faithfully produce a worthy crimson lens? That question must await the next part of this expedition. For now, our map has grown a little larger. The mold has been completed. Whether it has fulfilled its purpose, we shall soon discover. Until then, I remain your faithful explorer. Join me for part 2, when our expedition continues with the casting of the crimson lens.